I'm Tom Gentry, and this is Men Who Talk. It's brought to you by Begin Again Institute, a 2-week intensive program for men with intimacy disorders in Boulder, Colorado, where my friend and co-host Ed Tilton is the Chief Operations Officer. Ed and I wanted to have a series of conversations on some of the barriers we see that prevent men from living more authentic lives. We want to underscore the fact that healthy men do talk. We want to help men who often do struggle with intimacy be more true to themselves. And we want to help people who love men maybe understand them a little bit better. So please listen in, subscribe to the show, share this conversation with someone you love, and enjoy Men Who Talk. Today we're going to talk about raising men. So I was thinking about this a little bit and just thinking about some things that we might want to touch on as it relates to parenting boys, raising men. One of them is, and John Eldredge writes about this. He's written basically a whole book, Wild at Heart, about how, well, one of the things he talks about is how as men and as boys, we have this sort of innate need to measure up. And so I think that's one thing that's important to understand. When you have men in your life or males in your life, and it's like, we've talked about how one of the barriers with men and intimacy, especially in their relationships with their romantic partners, is that the woman will talk about what's going on with her and the man will try to solve whatever problem he derives from what she's saying, when what she really needs is to be heard. And to me, that's sort of an expression of how, as men, we want to measure up. That's sort of how that plays out. So I think it's good to understand that. I think it would probably be good to talk about aggression and how that's instinctive and how maybe it's important to teach boys how to channel that. I think that's really important. And I think one that everybody will want to talk about, I think, is the whole idea of boys crying and what we do with that. And one of the hashtags I see on social media these days is let boys cry, which kind of drives me crazy a little bit. I have mixed feelings about it. But to me, I can tell you what I tried to teach my son, and I feel like he's pretty emotionally literate at 16 years old. One of the things I would say to him is, cry as long as you need to cry, but when you're done, be done crying. And I don't know. I just think that that's really important, because there's a big difference between boys need to cry sometimes and that boy's a crybaby or a mama's boy or whatever the community around him, however they might label him. But it's another place where how, we think in such black and white ways. It doesn't have to be one or the other. You can cry and be strong. And you can shed tears now and then and not be a total crybaby. And to me, the whole crybaby thing is about being on the pity pot, right? Which is not a place that's productive to be. Anyway, I've said a lot. Any thoughts on what I've just discussed?
I agree with you. We see eye to eye on this. And I think part of it is that we're both raising sons. So it's something that's always on our mind. I think that, we want to, as fathers, part of the desire to raise men in a certain way is related to, having autonomous or self-sufficient or, men that will grow up to protect their own and to protect others. I know that's one of my biggest fears is, as I'm raising my son, I don't want him, I want him to have a certain amount of like self-reliance so that, when I die, he knows how to take care of himself and he knows how to be in relationships with others, and he will be able to, establish a community that'll be accepting and protecting him of himself, of him. That's one of the things that, I remember having this conversation with my dad. He said, you have a sister, and one of these days, like we will be gone, and your sister is all that you'll have. And so luckily Clay has a sister, but in raising him, I want him to be able to be a man that can stand on his own.
Mm. Well, and to me, this raises a point about this whole thing and the messages we give boys around crying. Because what you're essentially talking about is survival. And as dads, this topic around whether or not or how our sons show up in the world and when they shed tears and who they're willing to do it around or who they're not, it definitely touches that like existential button. It brings up the fears of, is he going to be destroyed? Right?
Yeah.
And I think that's what led you to that line of conversation, right?
No, I mean, it is. And it starts, it starts early. It starts with friendships. It starts with, making sure that they're not being bullied. And there's this quote that, I think Joe Rogan referenced it on his podcast, but I also think that it's been referenced elsewhere, which is that it's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war.
Hmm.
And this idea of like, I want my son to have the capability of protecting himself, but also have the choice of not having to do so.
Hmm.
If war comes to his way, I want him to be able to defend himself.
Hmm.
And I think that this is something that, a lot of the authors that talk about this, reference of like, it all comes down to safety.
Hmm.
It all comes down to safety. It comes down to competence. And, it all comes down to relationship and community. And I think as a father to a son, the number one thing that I can do is I can model that for him.
Hmm.
Because it's going to be a lot easier for him to understand emotions surrounding anger, surrounding abandonment, surrounding, what I like to call like red feelings. If I can model that and show that to him, how to feel without feeling overwhelmed, then I'm doing my job as a dad.
Hmm.
Because equally as important, like just because you teach your boy how to fight doesn't mean that he's going to have the ability to restrain himself when it's not time to fight or have a level head.
Well, you're teaching him how to fight, not to fight.
Exactly.
And and by the same token, you're teaching him how to cry not necessarily to cry. The context of it is really, really important in terms of him protecting himself.
Right.
I've given my son that message about cry as long as you need to cry, but be done when you're done. It wasn't cry as long as you need to cry wherever you go, whenever you need to. You know, that's at home.
Mm-hmm.
When you're among the people who love you and respect you and honor you and your feelings and your experience. But I was also really careful to teach him that just because you're great at expressing your emotions, you can't expect people out in the world, at school, on the playground to receive that the same way that we do. And in fact, you need to expect that they can't until they demonstrate otherwise, that they're trustworthy in that way.
Exactly. I mean, it's there was another quote that I looked up because I had a feeling that we were going to go to this space. So I found this other quote that I thought was just great, which was, you know, that the pain will leave when the lesson has been learned.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I think that those are some of the things that as men, I think oftentimes we're hardwired to like fix the problem. And I think when it comes to emotions and relationships, the problem isn't always that I'm feeling an emotion.
Right.
You know, and I think a lot of times like that's culturally what we're encouraged to think or how we're encouraged to, you know, to view the world, but more so, you know, that the lesson that we could learn could be out of grief or sorrow. And like the lesson could be, you know, hey, I lost somebody close to me and I don't want to forget that person.
Mm-hmm.
So what do I do to keep their memory alive? You know, and this is something that, you know, we see a lot. We see a lot of, and a lot of the guys that we work with is we fragment feelings to have a staggered impact on our relationship. You know, we feel something that's very difficult and we'll shove it down or we'll cut it off. We won't process it, only to then have it come back in our relationships in a weird and sideways way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, which is why your advice to your son is just so essential. Cry when you need to cry, and when you're done, be done. Work through the whole emotion.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're not honoring why you're crying, oftentimes that lack of honor shows up as dishonorable behavior in relationships later.
Mm-hmm.
Or, you know, the metaphorical kicking the dog
Mm-hmm.
because you feel like you're out of control, blowing up at your boss, or not being able to get your work done, or emotionally detaching from your kids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know, and it's ironic that a lot of times, I think as guys and probably as people, when we do opt to only work through the emotion part way in the context of a relationship, it's because we don't want to be quote unquote too much, right?
Mm-hmm.
We don't want to scare people away. We don't want to be abandoned, is really what it is, you know?
Yeah.
But in making that choice and handling it that way, we then become what we're trying to avoid becoming because it comes out sideways in ugly ways and in uncontrollable ways. And then we kind of are too much, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we sabotage the relationship that way.
And I think it's like super important just to highlight probably the obvious for most people that are listening, but all of it for young children, for young men, for boys is going to come in floods and waves of emotion. Because they're learning to experience emotion and to navigate it. You know, I mean, they should sob uncontrollably in the beginning. You know, and this is the more that we encourage them to stuff it down or to, you know, to stop crying or rub dirt on it, the more that they're looking at us and going, okay, I'm going to do exactly what you're going to do. And so unless you're listening and saying like, no, what I do works for me, it's great, I'm completely satisfied, it's probably a good idea to do a little inventory check of like, are there areas where I could be more vulnerable with people I trust, or I could allow myself to feel more in areas. And, you know, if you've ever been called stoic or distant or hard to read, or that might be you. You know, a lot of times, you know, the narrative that we have about ourselves is vastly different than the narrative that other people see about us. And sometimes it's in a really positive way. You know, sometimes people, you know, a lot of times the toughest critic is ourselves. But also, you know, there can be ways where, you know, and my wife is like very loving in this aspect, where if I'm having a tough day and it's hard for me to communicate, she'll just tell me, like, you're not doing a great job at communicating. But also, you know, that's a reality check for me to kind of look and say, what is it about this emotion or the circumstances surrounding this that's causing me difficulty with communicating it?
Well, and I think a lot of times just recognizing that we're in that state and letting it be what it is, not being reactive as a result of it, you know?
Right.
And one of the lessons I've learned over the years is we can't think our way out of feeling. So whatever it is that you need to feel in that moment when you're, I guess, jammed up, feel it, you know, to be able to recognize it and feel it and experience it. And as my therapist describes it, you know, go through it until you get back to neutral, which I really like that sort of way of explaining it. Getting back to neutral.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it you know, when, you know, using a classic guy car metaphor, you know, if you're driving a manual, when you stop, the goal is to go, you know, not to keep it in fifth gear and try to like stop the car. It's, you know, go back to neutral. One of the questions that came across on the chat though was, you know, what can we do to help other fathers? And so I'm assuming maybe the message is, you know, if you have a relationship with your father, you know, how do we help support them in their journey?
How do we support our fathers?
Yeah.
Well, my dad passed, and I think he's definitely someone, I've used the word stoic to describe him many, many times. And more recently, I think I have a clear understanding of how sad and stuck he was.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure there's anything I could have done besides just love him and be there for him. And, one of the real, one thing I'm really grateful for is that a few months before he died, there was a time when I got a few minutes alone with him when he was in the hospital and he was just about to have a quadruple bypass. And, he's laying on this hospital bed and he just reached over to me sobbing and said, "I'm sorry." And I was like, man, you don't have anything to be sorry for. I love you, and just the, to be able to be present for him when he shed tears. I mean, it was like the most satisfying interaction I've ever had with my dad. I felt connected with him in the way that I always wanted to, but never did. And I'm getting off track a little bit. This doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the question. I think one thing we can do to help other dads is when we hear people parroting the old messages, to point it out.
Yeah.
To point it out and to recognize that that's ridiculous. And, one of the things that you and I have talked about, one of the ideas I like is kind of making fun of them. Call them a meathead.
Yeah.
I think we need to get to the point where when someone is acting that way, where, boys aren't supposed to cry and blah, 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 call it what it is. You're being a meathead.
Yeah. I mean, and if that, and that's the hope and the goal behind that is that's seen as something that will jog them out of, well, this is what my dad did to me, so this is what I need to do to my son.
Right.
Because, and this is the hard part, right? You can't transmit what you don't have.
Right.
And a lot of times we're working off of not a deep emotional pool to pull from with our dads.
Mm-hmm.
And our dads maybe have a deeper emotional pool than our grandfathers.
Mm-hmm.
And so, part of this is, how do we deepen an understanding of what it means to be men? And also, create that space.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think another important thing that we can do is demonstrate it.
Yeah.
Model it, model emotional literacy unapologetically to other men.
And I think the other thing too is like to remember, just like if we have a son, it's inappropriate to expect my 3-year-old son to have the emotional capacity that I do.
Right.
Right. So if he's getting flooded with emotions, to let him work through the emotions, let him work through the feelings, and then process with them.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not said to be derogatory, but also to realize, it's inappropriate for us to expect young children to have the emotional capacity that we do as adults. It'd be inappropriate for me to assume that my 3-year-old son should be able to navigate emotions easily. I saw somebody take his toy away from him the other day and he went into a fit of rage.
Mm-hmm.
And, it'd be crazy for me to think that he could just manage it and go over and say, "Hey, that's my toy." Obviously that's the goal, but equally as important, right, is to realize that when we're working with or when we're engaging with our fathers or grandfathers, that we should also not overly expect them to be emotionally present, because their emotional pool might be a little bit deeper than the past generation. And so, we shouldn't weaponize this insight to create disconnection to people that we want in our community. Because then we are no better than the meathead.
Right.
Where it's like, you don't want to create a culture where it's like, what, bro? You don't understand about emotions? Ugh.
Right. Well, and that idea that I have, it's sort of rooted in, guys respond to humor.
Yeah.
And to kind of have fun with it. But what you're talking about, one of the things that, a lot of things come to mind. One is that as men in general, when we're around children who cry, we get reactive. And I don't think it's just men.
No.
And, I have this little niece who I've been around a lot and just observing her caregivers. And it's not any different than the way I was raised, or probably you were raised. There is just an excessive amount of attention on don't cry, stop crying. It's okay. You don't need to cry. I mean, it's like, it's pretty constant, right?
Yeah.
And so we're really indoctrinated to believe that that's something we should avoid, no matter what our gender is. And one of the things that's really interesting to me about that is that when a woman gives birth, what's the first thing we're waiting for when that child is born? To know that the child's healthy is for them to cry out.
Yeah.
And then from that point on, we tell them to stop. Right.
Right.
We're like, come on, cry. Let's hear it. Oh, thank God he cried. And then it's never, ever again. Never cry again.
Right. And I think that this goes back to something that you actually, I think you wrote about it. And this was about, not to go into the forest. Yeah, I think it's related.
Yeah. The idea that the modern man's wilderness that we are taught to avoid is the emotional side of life. Right.
And the piece that, and I'm going to do my best to remember the conversation, but it was, the emotional wilderness is like, don't go into that forest.
Right.
And the reason that a lot of us want to stop the crying or worry about the crying is because it brings up anxiety and fear in us that we can't, if they're overtaken by emotion, we don't have what it takes to get them back.
Yeah, if you go in there, I'm not going in with you.
Because I don't know.
I don't know if I'll ever come out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. But that's definitely, we've talked about that in different ways throughout this series, how people have a hard time hearing us and being present for us when we're expressing emotion because they're afraid to do it themselves. What about this thing with aggression, though? What do you think about that in raising a boy? I'm sure you've seen aggression in your son, right?
Yeah. I think part of it is when we're talking about raising boys is, I think it's important for us to know where, as if we're going to raise boys, we have to be present with our parenting. We have to be present fathers. And so the reason I say this is my son actually has a speech impediment.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was showing aggression at a very early age. And it was all related to his ability to communicate. He was, and I remember feeling a lot of guilt and shame, because the daycare lady was saying like, Clay bit somebody again today. And I'm like, oh, geez, I know, but I also was lucky enough that I got opportunities to read books about child development and know that like he's not on the path that he should be on. And so, we were able to provide him with a speech therapist to get him kind of back on track, and the aggression went away.
Mm-hmm.
But what I will say is this, he's 3 and he's far more aggressive in his play than my daughter was at 3.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there is whether it's testosterone or whether it's just how little boys are wired, that there's a relationship with competition or relationship with roughhousing,
Mm-hmm.
that I think is just really natural.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think that it's important to have the conversations similar to what I experienced with him not having, the advanced speech piece of like speech and ability to communicate plus competition, e- equals competition in some aspects, but inability to communicate plus competition often results in aggression.
Mm-hmm.
And in my mind, I think that they're different. What are your thoughts?
Oh, well, you remind me that, this goes back to the John Eldridge book where there's a part where he talks about like there are times that he let his son punch him or something like that, and just watched him delight in that, And I used to do that with Jack. I'd let him punch me in the stomach.
Yeah.
And it got to the point where I had to stop because, it hurt.
Yeah.
But man, he just got such a kick out of it, It just filled him with joy. And especially when he saw that it hurt me.
Yeah.
And I guess I just saw that as a healthy way to let him work some of that stuff out and feel strong. And it was just a fun thing. It's actually a way that we connected.
Oh, yeah.
That's really what it was,
Well, and that's where I see the communication piece coming in. Like, if my son understands that, like, because we do almost so many similar things than what you and your son did when he was probably little. I mean, we have something I call WrestleMania.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like if Clay's on the bed and he's dancing around, like I'm gonna come in and I'm gonna throw him around a bit, in a way that's fun, and then he's gonna come at me and I'm gonna really like ham it up.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, he's gonna hit and kick and do all these Ninja Turtle moves that he's learned, and but he but I'm trying to have as much communication as possible of like, hey, we're playing around, hey, we're having fun, hey, this is you know, because a lot of times when men witness violence, there isn't communication, you know, and I think that that's where it can get toxic,
Mm-hmm.
you know, because we're exposing them to violence without saying, but there is a choice,
Right.
you know. I'm choosing to be, you know, you know, my character name with my son is Sven the Destroyer. So I have like an accent, I do a whole bit, right?
Oh man.
But like, you know, he knows the difference between like dad and Sven,
Right.
you know, and so anyway, I mean, I just think that that's one of those things that there's going to come times where he is going to be faced with difficult emotions and aggression is going to be the option. And I always want him to know, like, to be able to communicate it, of
Mm-hmm.
like what was coming up for him. And also, you know, there, I don't want to say there's strategy in me becoming a different character, but also recognizing that you can play different parts in the same relationship. You know, there can be a part of you that is a protector.
Mm-hmm. Well, in channeling it, you know, I remember, you know, I played a little bit of football as a kid. And I remember one time I don't know, I connected the dots of using my aggression to hit,
Mm-hmm.
channeling it that way. And it was like the best game I ever had.
Oh, yeah.
You know, that's a healthy way to do it.
Right.
Hitting baseballs or golf balls or the punching bag.
Mm-hmm.
For some people, running. You know, I think physicality is important. You know.
Oh, yeah.
When it comes to sort of acting out aggression that way. And then just to touch on the whole measuring up idea and the importance of that. What are your thoughts on that?
I think the measuring up piece is, you know, it's probably similar to what a lot of people, you know, were told when they were being raised, which is, you know, there's always going to be somebody bigger, there's always going to be somebody stronger, you know. So working to be at the top isn't as important as working to be well-rounded, you know. Like Clay's going to have some genetic stuff of like, you might not be 6'4". You probably won't be 6'4", you know, but measuring up in terms of like being able to communicate and also being able to be emotionally present and being able to be physical. You know, I mean, when he gets older, like I'm definitely going to take him for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Mm-hmm.
Like I want him to know how to handle himself so that he won't feel the need to measure up outside of, he won't feel the need to prove himself in ways that don't really matter, but have large consequences.
Mm-hmm.
There was a podcast I was listening to, and it was between two martial arts experts, and they said, like, imagine that you go into a room and you don't have any of the training and you don't have any of the physical, you know, experience that we do. Like, what would that, you know, but you go into a room with a lot of people, what would that feel like? And the other guy was like, yeah, that'd be terrifying. And he's like, that's what normal people, and I'm using air quotes here, but like normal people feel on a day to day. And so like when it comes to measuring up, I want my son to have the tools and ability to know that he can protect and defend himself. But I also don't want him to be so unbalanced with himself as a person that he feels the need to overexert one aspect to gain acceptance in another.
Mm-hmm.
What about you?
I don't know. I just think, like I said before, I think it's important raising boys, being friends with boys, being in relationships with males. I mean, to understand that that's just sort of a fundamental need that always exists. And I know it's something that comes up a lot in my men's group. That's the button that's getting pushed, especially like in their romantic relationships. That's the button that's getting pushed. Am I measuring up? I'm not measuring up. It comes up with, your livelihood, your parenting. I mean, it just comes up in the bedroom.
Oh yeah.
Any number of ways it comes up. It's just sort of ever present. And I just think it's important to understand that if you want to understand men,
Yeah.
So Jeffrey's got his hand up here.
Good afternoon, Ed. Good afternoon, other guy. Good afternoon, ladies and Richard. I don't know. My dad still lives in the house I grew up with, so that's like a horror show in itself. Going back there once a week, but yeah, whenever I'm over there, I always hear the echoes of when are you going to grow up and start acting like a man? And I would turn to my dad between sobs and say, but I'm only 12 and I look like I'm 7. And it was just like from 6th through 8th grade in middle school or junior high or whatever the shorties are calling it these days. It's just every night I would just cry myself to sleep. There was just so much fear going on. Fear of my parents, fear of school, fear of keeping my shit together. Because I knew there was something wrong with me at age 12, and I started seeing a child psychologist for a few months back then. But, I could never show those type of emotions around my friends because, then the mental beatdown would occur where I would be called the B word, the F word, or the P word and just be piled on. So that wasn't going to happen. But, the minute I got home and another pallet of Kleenex pulled up to the house, it just, it was like nonstop. And there were only 2 criers in our house. It was myself and my little sister. My brother was stoic too at that age, and my mom only cried during sad movies. So, and my dad, like I've shared before, I've only seen him cry twice in 58 years. So, yeah, it's just not supposed to show emotion, or at least not supposed to cry. And I would just, even in all my romantic relationships, I had no problem crying then either. And I know that was difficult for whoever I was involved with at the time because I was supposed to be this emotionally strong one, and I wasn't. And but yeah, crying is an issue that whenever I drive home from seeing the other guy, well, it's only been twice, but for 7.5 months, I maybe have cried like twice. But the minute I get in my car and start driving down on I-95, the tears come. And they usually last for a few days. And I was told that they would eventually come, and they have. And I don't know. I guess a lot of it is I play this this is your life game with my brain cells and rehash the whole story of what I've gone through, but still surviving.
Well, one thing that just kind of makes me sad about all of it is that even as a little kid, you were convinced there was something wrong with you because you cried. And, that's not true. It never was. And I know for me, at some point, I had to start showing, and, at the risk of sounding like cliche here, showing some compassion for my inner child, for the little boy. Like, he deserved better than what he got. And, it's the same for you. You deserved to grow up in a home where someone was available for you emotionally. And you didn't get that, and it's understandable, like we've talked about in this room, you can kind of expect not to get that at school or from your peers when you're a kid. And I would like to think more and more as time goes on that every generation is a little bit better at validating their children's emotions. I'm just sorry you didn't get that. But at this point, the only one who's going to give it to you is, you need to give it to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What about you, Ed? Thoughts?
I mean, I think you said it really well. I mean, it's hard. It's hard to refine an understanding of emotion if you don't have a model, to work towards. And I completely agree, Jeffrey. But the beautiful thing is that we have the ability now to reparent or to reattune ourselves in safe ways, and healthy ways do involve crying. So it sounds like you're doing a really good job to give yourself what you need.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming up, man. Richard, how you doing today?
Doing okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Great. First time here. First time doing this. So,
well, welcome.
Appreciate your patience. Hey, Tom. Hey, Ed, and everyone else. Yeah, it's a great topic. I'm really glad you guys are doing this and having this online for us, for men and women to listen to. This is really great. I'm a divorced dad. Got 3 adult kids, 1 son, 2 daughters. I remember as a kid, my mom dropping me off to try out for Little League, and I think I was about maybe 7, and had my glove, had my cap, all the stuff you need. Went out there onto the field not knowing really anything about the game because my father was working all the time. He really didn't do much with me as a kid. Anyway, so I went out on the field and I took position. Coach told me to take position at second base, which I did. And the kid at bat hit a line drive right into my face, broke my glasses, and the glass from the glasses went into my eye. I fell to the ground. I was in tears. I was just, traumatized, basically. And, my mom was not around. She dropped me off and drove off. The coach came out of the dugout and looked at me and saw me crying and said, "Get your ass back in the dugout." And it was such a shaming experience. I never will forget it. And luckily there was somebody else around that thought, maybe we need to take this kid to the doctor. He's got glass in his eye. So thank God somebody was paying attention. But that's just a little vignette of many sort of types of experiences like that I had as a kid. In my family, my father was gone a lot. My mom ran the household, and she was an alcoholic. And she had a very infamous saying. When I would cry at home, she would say, "You stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about." And that taught me at an early age not to shed a tear, at least not around her, and that it wasn't okay. And that's pretty much how I lived most of my life into adulthood. And I just wanted to share some of my experience with you there because about the elements or the experience of trauma in at an early life, teenage or kid life, can really affect you your whole life. I guess if you allow it to. Luckily, I also did other things in my life, learned to get in touch with my emotions, went to graduate school, and now today I became a psychotherapist. So now I work with emotion all the time, my own and others. And I think that was very much a part of my own healing process to take this professional route. So I just wanted to share, just say hello and introduce myself.
Thank you. And man, it drives me crazy. I can be pretty bad with names sometimes, and I'm drawing a blank on the name of this author, the guy who wrote The Velvet Rage. And I heard him speak. He was the medical director at Michael's house in Palm Springs. And, he's written a lot about gay males and about how invalidated that lifestyle is or has tended to be as kids grow up. And one of the points that he made that I'll never forget is that just being invalidated consistently is a traumatic experience. That is trauma to a child. And, we do a lot of that in our society. We really do. It's and there's something about Little League, So many of us have had such formative experiences in youth sports. Like with me, I was thinking about this a little bit earlier, but my Little League coach was a hard ass. He was a good coach. And I remember, I had to try out for his team and we won. Like we won all the time. We practiced all the time. We were a good team. And in that first year, as we were preparing for the season, and I'm out in right field or whatever, just, the new kid, low guy, lowest rung. If I'd miss a fly ball or something like that, I'd cry. And that lasted about 2 practices. And finally, he just gritted his teeth at me one day, and said, "Quit your crying." And the message, what I got from that wasn't never cry. It was now's not the time. You need to toughen up a little bit. Now's not the time. And it really, it helped me because I quit crying. And which I think brings us to the point that this really isn't a black and white issue.
No.
Like I needed to toughen up a little bit. I needed to stop crying then, in those moments. It wasn't an appropriate time to cry. That's the thing. It really wasn't something to cry about for a 9-year-old kid. I think that's the important part of it. But the whole thing about you better quit your crying or I'll give you something to cry about. I mean, a lot of us heard that. I know I heard that plenty of times.
Oh, yeah.
So.
And I just always think it's just so interesting how a similar statement, like I'll give you the example of like, what never convinces my wife to calm down is like telling her to calm down.
Right.
But it's so interesting. It's like, telling people to calm down doesn't calm them down, but telling kids to stop crying or you'll give them something to cry about, like is seen as like something that we all hear. And I think your point, Tom, is super important of like, there are times where I was told, to buck up or to stop crying by other men that I respected and looked up to and admired. And it clicked differently than when it was said when it was said in an environment where fear was present.
That's a good point. Yeah. Because I mean, this particular coach, man, I really did look up to him and still do, really, you know. Alan Downs is the name of that author. Alan Downs. Thank you, Jeffrey. Maybe something we could touch on is the idea of, as men, crying with our partners.
Oh, yeah.
Because that's a slippery slope, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's, yeah. I cannot tell you how many times I've had, I mean, outside of like my own personal experience with my wife, I've had female friends of mine that are in like the dating circles that have been like, and then he cried, and I was like, I'm done.
Right.
And they'll just be like, they're very open about it.
Right.
And so that's part of why Tom and I are doing this, is like, we got to have men, you know, raising, you know, their emotional knowledge. And then we also, you know, want to create safe space for guys to talk about this. But, you know, I think the lesson or the middle ground to be shared on is, it's important to know who you're shedding tears with. And it's equally as important, and this is why I think that we've laid out the series the way that we have, of like, it's important for guys to make guy friends.
Mm-hmm.
It's important for guys to have older men in their life as sponsors or mentors or tutors, or, you know, insert whatever title you want. But sometimes crying in front of your wife or your girlfriend or your partner is not going to get you. You're right. It's a slippery slope.
You said it's not going to get you what? Can you repeat that?
I just trailed off because I'm at such a loss.
Oh, okay.
You know?
Okay. Well, you know, I'm glad you mentioned about we need other guys, you know?
Yeah.
Because to me, that's a really important part of it. And, you know, I've been in other discussions where this idea has come up that, you know, women say they want men to show their emotions, but then when they do, they're repulsed. When men do, women are repulsed. And the point that I have made when I've heard that come up is that it's how we show up in the relationship. It's not whether or not we experience emotions. If I go to my partner and I have a total fucking meltdown,
yeah,
that's not hot. You know, that's not, you know, she's not going to want to sleep with me. You know, she's going to be repulsed on an instinctive level. It's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But if I have like a balanced relationship with my emotions, and I've been going through something really difficult, and I've been using my supports outside of my relationship so that I don't have to have a meltdown. And by the way, my spouse, girlfriend, whatever, isn't the only person I express emotions with. She isn't everything to me. She's my partner, right?
Right.
If I go to her and say, listen, you know, I've been having a really difficult time at work or whatever, and I just want you to know that this is what's going on in my life. And so if I seem distant or aloof or whatever, I want you to understand that it's not you.
Mm-hmm.
That's completely different than having a meltdown.
Yeah.
And so it is about strength.
Mm-hmm.
It's about having the emotional strength to manage your emotions in a way that you have some balance in your relationship. where you're not expecting her to be the end all be all, because it's too much.
Well, and also looking at it from a shared experience as well. There are things that you go through as a couple that can be scary and worrisome and deeply emotional.
Yeah.
And then there are the things that they might not know what you're going through, but you're pulling them into your emotional chaos.
Mm-hmm.
And so like what you're saying around, hey, communicate some of the changes in the relationship without changing the relationship due to emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that distinction is really important, because you can change, and I've heard it from, some of my friends that are dating. You can change the whole relationship by having out of control emotions.
Yeah, it's like a loss of respect that takes place.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I mean, I think there's kind of no turning back a lot of times when that happens.
Yeah.
And of course there are exceptions. Like if you're in a long-term relationship with somebody and you lose your dad and you have a meltdown and she soothes you, like that's a whole different thing. Right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think the point you're making about pulling her in and sort of exposing her to, your chaos,
Mm-hmm.
when really it's unnecessary.
Right.
But you're just doing it because you don't know how to do it with anyone else. And, you've kind of turned her into your mother, right?
Well, but that's a super key piece to point out. If you don't have anybody else in your life that you have as an outlet or confidant or any of those things, the emotions are going to be more extreme in the relationship. It's very different if I have a conversation with a buddy of mine about an issue that I'm having at work. By the time my wife gets home, she says, "How was your day?" "Good."
Mm-hmm.
Because I've managed it.
Right.
But if I'm bottling all of it up, waiting for her to come home just to emotionally take her hostage for 45 minutes or an hour.
You're dumping on her, essentially, is what you're.
Exactly. And then all of a sudden it's like, "Well, how was your day?" And she's like, "It's fine." I'm like, "Oh, now you don't want to talk?" And that can, it's a lot of, because I dumped on her for 45 minutes. Now I'm starting to have some regret and maybe some shame. And so I'm wanting her emotions to match my emotions. And then we start to get into some really difficult places of like mind reading and expectations that aren't spoken. And
Yeah.
moral of the story is guys need friends and everybody needs a community.
Absolutely. Chelsea, thanks for coming up. How you doing?
I was making my dinner and then I heard, I didn't have my phone in front of me. So I think it was Ed who said like, "Oh, I'll give you something to cry about." And I was so triggered. Like my dad used to say that to me all the time. When I would have my breakdowns, like my parents would applaud at me and ask me where my Oscar was. Like that's like, and I really don't think they realized that I was going to like hold on to it forever. But like that type of teasing, it definitely made me feel like my emotions were like not appropriate. And I don't think I've ever seen my brother cry ever. And like they just had to put their family dog down. My brother did. And like, I had to wait a few days, like according to my sister-in-law, I had to like wait a few days to even say anything about it. Like, cause I know he was so upset, but I'm just sitting over here like wondering, did he even cry? Like, I don't know. Like, I'd never seen him cry, but I'm sure he's a softie now. But anywho, but I just like was thinking of that the whole time I was cooking.
Yeah. One thing I want to say, and Ed and I have talked about a few times during the course of this series of discussions, I think it's getting better. I think as generation after generation, things are getting better in terms of how our relationships with our emotions. And an example of that I witnessed in the last few days. So my son had a performance. He's an actor. And, on Saturday night, about 2/3 of the way through the show, a man in the audience who I later found out was a parent of one of the actors had what seemed to be a seizure. And it was all very jarring, and the show was stopped. And, you know, he was helped out. An ambulance came, took him away, all that. And at some point, the department head came out and said, listen, we're going to take 10 here, and we'll come back to you guys, and, you know, we'll get this thing rolling again, basically, assuming they were going to go on with the show, right? And come to find out, what happened is that she went to the kids and mentioned that, taking 10, and they were like, what? Taking 10? Like, and they weren't, they didn't want to go on. They didn't want to go on. It didn't feel right to them. You know, out of compassion for the kid who, like 10 feet away, watched his dad go through this while he was performing on stage, and just recognizing the difficulty of the situation, and priorities, just said, like, no, like, we're not going to do this. We're not. So they rescheduled it. And I just, I was proud of my son, you know, and proud of those kids for having the courage to just be real and not be afraid to clearly express what they were feeling and what they believed about it, right? I thought it was cool. Anyway, what do you think, Ed?
I think that's what courage is. I think that's the embodiment of courage, is knowing the right thing to do and knowing some of the expectations, but also being able to stand up for what's right in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if more fathers can show their sons that, and if we can all be present around that, then we're going to raise some really great kids.
Mm-hmm. And I guess to circle back to this whole let boys cry thing, because I mentioned how it sort of rubs me the wrong way, this idea. And here's why. Because if we're raising kids in an informed way, like considering all these things that we've talked about, and raising confident boys with self-esteem, who understand there's no shame in experiencing emotions, their attitude will be, I don't need your permission to cry.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea of letting boys cry, no, raise them in a way that they have the courage to say, I don't need your permission.
Right.
If you don't like it, tough shit. That's where I think we need to get with this stuff.
Right.
Is to not be apologists about expressing our emotions. And if people have a problem with it, let it be their problem, because it is. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you think, Ed? How'd we do here? Did we cover everything?
I mean, I think we covered everything for today.
Yeah.
I think we did. I think with the help of the audience, we did a great job.
I feel pretty good about it.
Next week, we're working to put something extra special together, and we're going to have a third person on stage, Dr. Michael Barnes, who specializes in family and trauma. And so the topic is going to be the intimacy of family.
Be a man. Dress for success. Wear the pants in the relationship. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Give the shirt off your back, but don't lose your shirt. Are you really going to wear that shirt? Be a man. Be a ladies' man. Be the man at home. Make a man out of that kid. Sometimes you have to manhandle a situation to show them you're the man. Act like a man. Be the man at the gym. Is that all you can lift? Man up. Whoops. Man down. Be a man. Carry on. Carry your weight. Carry your water. Carry the ball across the goal line. Be a man. Take a chance. Take a risk. Take the job. Take the money. Don't take more than you give. Don't take any crap. Be a man. Be the man at your job. Work like a man. Be successful. Hustle. A hardworking man is a happy man. Never send a boy to do a man's job. Be a man. Take it seriously. Take a joke. Never let him see you sweat. Drink like a man. Smoke like a man. Fight like a man. Be a man. Tough it out. Don't cry. Don't complain. Don't worry. And don't trust doctors. Die like a man.